So, who's got a question this morning they've been gnawing on, working on, chewing on? Andrew.
So something I've been thinking about pretty consistently is after you going through the history of the church and everything, I think it elevates the importance of making sure that we have leadership roles properly defined, but more importantly, the qualifications for such. And I was curious if you would mind going through and how just helping me fully understand, because I went through and read Christ Church on elders and evangelists and deacons and whatnot. Specifically with elders, I was curious what really gives us the full understanding of what is required of them, but ultimately what's the most important kind of boxes to check and see in someone that's pursuing eldership.
Okay, I just have been writing a series of bulletin backs on 1 Timothy. And if you want more information, Andrew, you can go online. And those should be, those 1 Timothy 3. Also, the opening series, talks about evangelists. So I'll give you more print information on that. 1 Timothy 3. Three major sections that deal with the eldership. 1 Timothy 3 and 5, Titus 1, and 1 Peter chapter 5. And, he says in verse 1, 1 Timothy 3:1, he said, it's a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it's a fine work he desires to do. Now, the emphasis always has to be on the work. Okay, a lot of, I think I mentioned when I was in Great Falls at the part of the Christian church, I was immersed into Christ in March. In September, they elected me to be a deacon. And, if I had hung around a couple more years and campaigned a little bit, I could have got elected an elder, okay? And if your goal is ambition, I always called it position ambition, then you're not interested so much in the work as you are interested in the title. And one of the reasons that the early church got into trouble, we were talking about that chart here a couple of weeks ago. One of the reasons the early church got into trouble, as you can see, some of the guys were interested in being elevated, and so they took the title of bishop over the elders, and they flat out abolished the function or office of evangelist. And that combination, set the stage for the eventual development of the papacy itself. So the emphasis has always got to be on the work. And so it goes through and lists some things. Got to be a good guy, got to be a family guy, and the word must keeps showing up. And so those are qualities, but it's not a checklist. See, it's an overflow of who the guy already is, all right? And so same thing in 1 Timothy 5, there's another point or two here. In verse 17, he says the elders who rule well, okay? So, you got to have these leadership qualities, okay? 1 Timothy 3 doesn't, it lists some things, but the guy who's going to be an elder, bishop / pastor, he's got to have the leadership characteristics. So he can't always put that on a checklist. He's in Titus chapter 1. One of the things I want to point out there is in verse 9. It says, holding fast the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching, he be able both to exhort in sound doctrine and refute those who contradict. Okay. Now, in order for a guy to be an elder, he's going to have to spend a lot of time in personal Bible studies actually making disciples. Because one way or another, that's where you're going to cut your teeth for any of these things. So you're working on a personal basis pretty quick. You're trying to help people raise their kids, trying to help them get their finances in order, trying to help them get their attitude straight, get the right perspective. See, all those things are training for what the future elder is going to need to be effective. See, in other words, I was at a Christian church men's gathering in west of Kalispell, a little place called Marion, and you been up there? Yep. And so there was a guy by the name of Robert Hatch that was the lead speaker. Now, Robert Hatch had come into the Church of Christ here in Bozeman, and he come in and he brought what they called the Crossroads movement at the time, which eventually became the Boston movement and eventually became the International Church of Christ. And so he was implementing the Crossroads movement program, where they basically had they had these soul talks, and they'd get you into the soul talks, and pretty emotional, and they'd kind of love bomb you. And then when they decided it was your time to be immersed and you didn't do it, they'd withdraw their fellowship from you. Okay, now that gets people immersed, but that's not necessarily honest. And at that point, you had a discipler, and you're a disciple. One of the young ladies I was working with got pulled into that, and her discipler wouldn't let her see her sister for 3 years because they didn't want the sisters in. Now, the sister was actually a Christian, okay, part of our congregation, but they didn't want the sister to see her for 3 years because you can see they're trying to control that situation. Well, Robert Hatch broke with that, and so he's lecturing the Christian church guys on elders. See, and he's gone the route that there's no real office of elder. Elders are just watchdogs. They're guys that have watchdog capabilities out on the edge of the camp, looking out for false teachers and stuff. So you're going to see a lot of things, but the problem is so many times these guys become elders, or they get the name elder, and they don't know what they're doing. See, and Robert Hatch didn't know what he was doing. See, as a parent to me, he didn't know what he's doing. He went into the system he was in. It turned out to be a buzzsaw, so he bounced out of it. And he wasn't actually making disciples. He was getting people into groups and using groupthink techniques on them. And, they had lots of numbers. I think they had 80 kids at one point, showing up in their assemblies at the Church of Christ. They had lots of numbers. But it was, it wasn't for the right reasons. So when you're looking at things, you have to, be able to, discern a little bit what's really going on. There was a preacher, I can't remember his first name, is Preacher Leach in Lancaster, California. He's an older guy, Church of Christ guy, and he got pulled into the Boston movement. But he got out of it. And I asked him, I said, why did you break with it? He said, well, I got attracted to it in the first place because they were getting lots of numbers. And but he said, I don't believe that people can be stamped out of mold like cookie cutters. See that? Okay, this is from an older guy who had some experience and, was able to, step back and take an analysis of it. So Robert Hatch didn't know what he was talking about, but he's lecturing on elders, okay? An elder's got to be able to exhort in sound doctrine. He's got to be able to refute those who contradict. How are you going to do that if you've never done it? If you've ever done it down in the trenches where the people are, you don't really know what you're talking about. And it's pretty obvious to somebody who has been in the trenches when somebody's talking and they don't know what they're talking about. It's like me, if I walk on a construction job and, I can tell the guys that work in our section of Belgrade down there, on the northwest side. I mean, these guys come in and they do a job. The, I guess, kind of condo that Katie and I live in, we're surprised how well built it is. I mean, we can't even hear the neighbors. You know how rare that is when you're, it's a fourplex and you can't hear your neighbors. And it's really well designed. I mean, they knew what they were doing when they came in and built it. And so imagine me walking on the construction site and starting to tell these guys to do it different, See, but the head guys that work those things, they can tell by looking, whether it's right or whether it isn't. I saw some concrete work being done when Katie and I were walking, and I said, I don't think that's going to fly, And next day we came by, and it had been corrected. Okay, because see, the guy that knew what he was doing came by and said, "Okay, we're going to redo this." Well, it's the same way when it comes to making disciples. Okay, you got to know what you're doing. See, because how are you going to guide a congregation? See, the ultimate goal of every congregation is to seek and save the lost. Okay, and that has to be your mission statement. Matthew was talking about the Alabama football team. It'd be hard to criticize Alabama football team for the past several years, their track record and stuff. Nick Saban's coach. I mean, everywhere he went, he's winner. It'd be hard to criticize. So I think he probably knows football. But can you imagine a football team stepping out on the field and not knowing what they're supposed to do? See, I mean, there are football fields teams that do step on the field, but their goal is to win. They got to know that, and they all got to work together to win. See, maybe if they're a good enough team, maybe their goal is to win the conference championship or the national championship or whatever. But see, they got to know what the goal is. Well, what's the goal for the church? Well, it's to seek and save the lost. That's what Jesus came to do. And it's great to have some good fellowship and some good teamwork along the way, but actually you're not going to have great fellowship and great teamwork unless you have the common goal. That's how it plays out. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels and killing some time. So, see, if a person's gonna be elder / bishop / pastor, he's got to know what he's talking about. So he's going to have to spend a lot of time in the trenches. We had, some issues here about 1994, 95, and some guys wanted to be elders. And I said, well, I'd like to see at least 2,000 Bible studies that you guys had first. 2,000! Well, that's not many. If you have 3 per day on the average for 330 days a year, that's 1,000 Bible studies. Okay? And that's actually really doable. If you're going to be an elder, you should have had a lot more than that. Okay? And, but see, some of the guys that wanted to be elders didn't know what they were doing. And it's very obvious to anybody who did know what they were doing that these guys didn't know what they were doing. See, so they wanted the position without doing what they needed to do to get there. That's why I say any man aspires. See, if it's something you aspire to, you'll do the work now, see, to get there. And if you turn to Acts 17, Acts 17, this is Paul, and he wants to meet with the leadership of Ephesus. In Acts 17, and Acts chapter 20, Got something else in mind. Acts chapter 20, verse 17. Acts 20, verse 17, he says, from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church, okay? So when it comes to elders, there always has to be a plurality, okay? So let's say a man aspires to the office of overseer, and he does the work, but there's no other guy qualified. He should just quit, right? See, if you got your focus on Jesus and Jesus' goals for the church and for the world, okay, you're going to do the work whether you get a title or not. And so the emphasis has to be on, okay, who's doing the work? And if a guy's doing the work, you know, these other things on the checklist will actually automatically show up. Going back to 1 Timothy 3. So you think a guy is going to be an effective disciple maker if he's not temperate there in verse 2? You know, temperate means to be able to control his attitudes and actions and all that goes with that, right? Because do you think you take any personal shots when you're having personal Bible studies? Of course you do. What if you're not temperate? You're going to go haywire, okay? Prudent. How are you going to help somebody with their personal finances when yours are all out of whack? I was doing some work in Helena. I had two families that I was meeting with. I saw a poster where some guys from Wabash, Indiana were coming in. They were starting a Christian church. And so I met with them. And so they had a guy by the name of Jerry Saltzman they're kind of doing a revival type thing to get the church off the ground. And a guy by the name of David Carnes was going to be doing the preaching. Okay, so I said, well, if you guys want to go work with them, that's okay with me. That'll save me driving back and forth to Helena all the time. And, well, 3 years later, David Carnes left Helena, you know, owing $3,000 in bad checks. Okay, how is this guy going to teach somebody how to handle their finances? Now, in this case, it's an evangelist, but some of these things go across the board. You know, say prudent. You got to be able to handle things like finances. You got to be intelligent about how you go about doing things. Prudent. You know, you can work a congregation to death. You know, if you start having Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, Thursday nights, Friday nights meetings. You know, we're going to have Greek on Thursday nights, and you guys all come, and you know, Monday night we're going to have this, and well, you can work a congregation to death. You're not very prudent. So you got to gauge a little bit. When I was herding cattle in Tobacco-Ritz, I was about 14 years old, and I had a mare that I was riding, and we were getting ready to make the trip from North Meadow Creek to South Meadow Creek, you know, work the cattle over there. So we started off, you know, I mean, the sun wasn't quite up when we left our base camp, and a little ways out, you know, we're starting to go up this hill, pretty good sized hill, and you know, my mare wanted to run, and so I let her. Well, the cow herder, he hollered at me. Stop. He said, "Want to kill your horse?" He said, "You want to be walking that 16 miles?" He said, "You kill her." I said, "She wants to run. She doesn't know any better." You know, that was Kenny Parent. You know, And one of my favorite examples is back there in the Old Testament when Esau comes to meet Jacob with 400 men, and they get it all solved, and Esau says, well, I'll go with you. Jacob says, no, let's not do that. He said, I got, milking ewes and milking camels, and I got mom and nursing babies. He says, what happens if we push them too fast? See, so prudent leadership's gotta factor those things in. See, so you start talking about an elder, you can't have just exactly a checklist there. And different guys are going to have different qualities, different things that they're good at. See, the idea is they're going to need to be able to mesh together as an eldership and be able to mesh their strengths and make it work. See, so they're going to be different, but there's certain things they got to have in common, and the main thing they got to have in common: make sure that they have the goal firmly fixed in mind. The goal of the church got to be firmly fixed. Even if they're elders, an elder naturally is going to think a little bit more in terms of, okay, how can I put people together and get them working as a teams. That's good. That's how it should be. But that doesn't mean that they don't think in terms of getting evangelism done. See, so you have all those things going on. I always like to stress that who is more important than what. See, everybody looks at these qualifications. These are whats. Okay, what do I have to be? Well, and what do I do? Okay, who you are is where you want to be really doing the work, because who you are is going to determine whether you're effective or not. So, to be, as Matthew brought out in the opening, to be disciples of Jesus, to be worthy, doing our part to develop his character in us, working in partnership with God. See, who is more important than what? That doesn't say that what isn't important, but who you are is going to be more important than the what. And so a guy can meet some checklist things, but the who's not going to be there. See, now leadership, does the future elder, does he have the ability to impact people in a positive way? Does he have the ability to motivate? Does he have the ability to encourage? All of these things really show up in there. So when you're talking these things, you remember these are just trying to paint a picture of a who. And you put the who important in there, then the what will take care of itself. Same way, why is more important than how. People want to know, how do I do this? Or how do I go about making disciples? Or how do I go about setting up Bible studies? The more important question is why. Why do you want to do it? See, because if your earnest desire is not that person's soul and that person's eternity, then you can have all the checklist how things in place, and it's not going to be effective particularly. See, so you got to really work on your why. Why am I doing this? Now, why does a guy want to be an elder? Personal ambition? Obviously, that's a factor. So that's a general answer, Andrew. But go to the newcreationstudies.org website. I'm not sure if the Christ Church Online ties in. Okay, go to the newcreationstudies.org and read the opening sections to the 1 Timothy introduction, because it talks about evangelists, and then read the section on the elders. So, any further comment on that?
First of all, I really appreciate you really layering in the importance of the who and the why, because I think that really kind of clears away all the muck, and I'm glad that you kind of brought that out and clarified, because I didn't necessarily phrase it in a way that I was as clear as what I intended. So thank you for that, first of all. And then second of all, looking into it, I wanted to make sure that I got this right in terms of understanding all the pressures that kind of come into the society we're in regards to children. And I think that's something that is definitely worth really honing in on, so making sure that we can define that when it says children that believe, and I believe Titus, and in 1 Timothy 3, when it
There's a lot of other factors that come into that, but basically, the family is the training ground for the future elder. So, that's why those things are in there for that purpose. Anything else? Anybody else want to comment? Okay, anybody else got another question? Yeah, Ellie?
So in John 11, it goes over Lazarus, who's the brother of Mary and Martha, and how he dies and then he's resurrected by Jesus. I was wondering, and I know that not necessarily every person in the Bible who has the same name is the same person. That doesn't make any sense. But in Luke 16, oh wow. In Luke 16, in verse 19, and I think through the rest of the chapter, it goes through the story of Lazarus and the rich man, which is a guy named Lazarus who died and who went to Abraham's bosom, you know the story. What I'm wondering is, are they the same person? Because I've read some stuff that says that they are, but it's a human guesswork, in my opinion. Like, I'm wondering if there's anything the scripture says on that.
Well, there's some pointers, okay? Now remember, Lazarus is a pretty common name, okay? It's not unusual for somebody to be named Lazarus. When we were in Belarus, there, a lot of the guys are named Alexander. The nickname for that, Sasha, okay? And a lot of the girls are named Natalia or Natasha, okay? And so when John Dowdy gets married to his Belarusian wife, Sveta, their oldest son is named Alexander, and the oldest girl's named Natasha or Natalia, okay? See, so he's a lot of names, and just check out all the Marys that are in the scripture. So my point is Lazarus is a common name. So the Lazarus in the Luke 16 story that Jesus tells, a poor guy, really poor guy. Oh, when he's dying, they got to take him down to a rich guy's place, lay him on the ground in the front of the rich guy's house, and hope he gets some crumbs. See, in John chapter 12, in verse 1, John 12:1, Jesus, therefore, 6 days before Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So he made him a supper there, and Martha was serving. Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Okay? Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples who was intended to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to poor people?" So let's say the average person in this room makes $30,000 a year. Actually, can anybody survive on $30,000 a year? So let's say 50,000, okay? So 300 days' wages would be pretty close to 50,000. Okay, so that family is not a poor family, Elliot. See, in fact, if you back up to chapter 11, okay, when they're in the house here, in verse 30, John 11:30, now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha met him. Then the Jews, that's the Jewish hierarchy, who were with her in the house, consoling her when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Okay, this is a family of influence. See? And so the Jewish hierarchy is closely enough associated with this family that they're actually in the house with the mourners. That's not a poor family. See, so couldn't be, they're not the same. Does that help? Yep. It's a good question. Any further comment? Okay, another question today. See, you never know where the piece of information that you're going to get is going to be valuable. Okay, okay. Do you have a question or comment?
Question.
You got a question or comment? Question. Okay. You want to go first?
I've been waiting a while.
Okay.
I think I got a pretty good handle on glory to glory, like 2 Corinthians 3:18. I don't know if you want to touch that, but I'm not sure how to explain from faith to faith from Romans 1. So.
Yeah, it's a great question. Okay, turn to Romans chapter 1 and verses 16 and 17. Now, two guys specifically are going to show up in the book of Romans. Abraham and David. Okay? So Romans chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, righteous man shall live by faith, which of course is a quotation from Habakkuk in the Old Testament. Used, I think, 3 times in the New Testament. It's a tremendously foundational point. You know, the idea being that the righteous going to live, is eternally by their faith, and everybody that doesn't have the right faith is not going to live eternally. Righteous will live by his faith. Everybody else going to die. So obviously faith is something you want to get in place. Now, how much information did Abraham have? Well, pretty limited. Did he have faith? The fact is, the faith of Abraham is specifically commended in Romans chapter 4. David had a lot more information by his time. You know, he's 1,000 years after Abraham. Does he have faith? Yeah, he's a man after God's own heart. And so he has more information. Now, Abraham doesn't have the faith. David doesn't have the faith. See, the faith is mentioned in Romans chapter 2, specifically the faith of Christ. Let's see, where'd it go here? Oh, it's Romans 3. Sorry. Romans 3, in verse 20, because no works, but by works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin. So he's making the point that, there's something called the works of the law, which is also called the law of Moses. In verse 22 then, talks about, let me read verse 21. Apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through the faith of Jesus Christ. Okay? So there's the faith. In Galatians chapter 3, again, you have to almost read the King James Version to get the expression, the faith of Christ. But in Galatians 3:23, but before faith came, were kept in custody under the law, being shut up to the faith, which was later to be revealed. Okay. So when he says from faith to faith, okay, was Abraham righteous by faith? Yes, he was. Was David righteous by faith? Okay, how are we going to be righteous? Well, it's going to be by the faith. So it's going to be from faith to faith. In other words, there's been a progressive revelation of what faith is. Okay, but we're to the point where the revelation's complete. And so we're all going to have to be justified by the same faith in order for that to happen. Any comments, Mr. Luke? Okay. Mike?
This is not a loaded question. so
Okay.
just-
I'm forewarned.
Since Andrew brought up about elders, evangelists, can you explain that? Because there's no criteria or anything for them. You know, the word is used in the New Testament, obviously. I don't know, what can you explain
Yeah.
what evangelist is?
Yeah.
Because I have my thoughts, what I think it is, but.
Yeah. Well, let's go to 2 Timothy chapter 2, or chapter 1, excuse me. And, okay, there's two words of exact equivalence in terms of meaning, preacher and evangelist. Preacher is a general word. You know, the Greek word would be anybody that climbs up on a stump, you know, and is saying something, that would be a preacher. Now, in the Bible, that gets specifically defined as somebody who's preaching the gospel. And so evangelist is somebody who proclaims the gospel, among other things. So in 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 11, Paul talks about the gospel. He said, for which I was appointed a preacher, say, or evangelist, and an apostle, a teacher. So Paul was actually an evangelist. Okay? And that gives you a little hint. So what qualifications did Paul have? Well, let's see. Murderer, forcing people to blaspheme. Okay. You know, quite a collection there, okay? So an evangelist is somebody who can get the job done. Just because I go down to the print shop and get a nice 4-color print job and got me some cards that say I are evangelist, that doesn't make me one. That happens quite a bit, by the way. So evangelist is somebody who can get out there, you know, make disciples, get things off the ground, get them moving, and not everybody is one of those. But that's what an evangelist is. 2 Timothy 4, verse 5, Paul tells Timothy, but you be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist. Okay. So again, the system where you go to Bible college, you graduate, they hand you a piece of paper, and now you're an evangelist. Yeah. It's always interesting to me when I graduated from college. You know, I was one of the top of my class, and you know, high GPA, and you know, went to work for the Anaconda Company in Great Falls. They gave me a little card. It said EIT. That means engineer in training. Wait a minute, I thought I was one. They said, no, you're not. You know, and before you can take your professional engineers, you know, you got to, as you expect, you got to have some experience. You know, you don't want some guy that's never had any experience designing your next $8 million office building and doing the engineering work on it. You know, is Gary here this morning? Yeah, Gary, you're a civil engineer, right? Yeah. Took you a while, right, to know. I mean, you had your college education, and then you got your hands on, right? Took a while, right? Yeah.
The interesting thing is
Just a second, Gary. We got to get this.
well, the interesting thing is, you know, to get your professional engineer's license, at least when I was in the 80s, they don't count construction experience as that experience. I mean, the engineering company, the company that both Amelia and I have worked for, she was a civil engineer as well. They hired engineers because they could talk toe to toe with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, the architects, and so on and so forth, and you could read drawings and things like that. But they didn't count that. They wouldn't count that experience towards your EIT or towards your PE.
Yep. So in the real world, you got to be able to know what you're doing, and you've got to proven that you're getting it done. So in the really important things like eternal, that doesn't count, right? See, the devil is just able to twist things upside down, backwards. So, evangelist is somebody who can get her done. And you can't get it done unless, number one, you're in the homes making disciples. See, it's one thing to come into an already existing congregation. Most of you guys are going to come to class whether you're interested or not. Okay, because you're gonna try to do your part to make the church run, right? Okay, but you start a congregation. If people aren't interested, they're not coming. See, there's certain things you have to actually do, certain things you really have to be in order to create the momentum and get the people. Okay, so you learn. You cut your teeth by getting it done. See, that's why I always encourage, everybody that, especially younger guys, some of you guys want to teach, some of you want to preach, some of you do want to be elders. Be in the process of making disciples. Be out there in the mix of humanity, and doing what you can. That's where you're going to learn. Another thing is it's always good to spend some time working with kids, especially sometimes younger kids. Now, younger kids, if you're not holding their attention, you know that really quick. Pretty quick they're, doing all those things, right? See, so it's great training to work with kids a little bit, because that's going to teach you the skills that you're going to need to hold people's attention. See, if your goal, again, is to be an evangelist, you want to be one that gets it done, then you got to be able to intersect across the board. And usually when I'm preaching or teaching, I actually have 3 or 4 layers of information that I build into my teaching, my preaching, because of the different locations where people are spiritually. Because those are the things you got to do. If you're starting a new congregation and you got a new guest there, okay, you got to be able to meet them, and you got to be able to meet the guy that's been there 20 years. Okay, you got to be able to meet both of them. So the evangelist is somebody who can get it done. Get it done. Let's see if this is scriptural. Publicly and house to house. That sound scriptural? I think it does. So that's why you don't have any particular qualifications. Let's say a guy's been a prisoner, and he's had a life of crime, and he gets it right, okay, and he comes out, he's had a pretty messed up past life, right? Okay, but if he gets out and gets it done consistently over a period of time, he end up being an evangelist, right? His resume isn't going to look that good on paper, probably. 4 years in prison, 1 year in the pre-release center, okay? Out of the pre-release center, back into prison, into the pre-release center, okay? Probably not going to look good. But there are guys that go through that come out, and they got some fire, and they got some drive, and they figured out how to get it right and keep it right. You're going to stop them from being evangelists if they're getting it done? See, it's the guys that get it done. See, it's got to be substance and not show. And you've got to be able to tell, as a congregation, you've got to be able to tell the difference between substance and show. But the substance is going to be out there in what gets done. James chapter 3. talks about wisdom. It talks about earthly wisdom, and there's plenty of that. Earthly, natural, demonic. Talks about jealousy and selfish ambition. You think those aren't motivators for some people? Well, you haven't been around much, okay? Verse 17 and 18, it says, the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy, and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. See, you can test, is the fruit of this guy that is an evangelist or eventually want to be an evangelist, is the fruit then people turning from darkness to light? Is the fruit them laying aside the deeds of darkness and becoming children of light? See, that's your test. And so a lot of the other things that people use, the guy's a good speaker, great. Comparatively speaking, it's easy to be a good speaker. Not so easy to do the work of an evangelist. And I've worked with guys that had pretty good gift of gab, and so they decided that they were evangelists and act like it for a little while until the work came. And then they bailed. So there's a lot goes into being an evangelist, but the bottom line is you're getting it done. Are there different personalities for guys that are evangelists? Oh, yeah. You'd expect there would be. But the bottom line is they're getting it done. So, further comment, Mike?
Again, there's no agenda here, so
Right.
I'm just, okay, because like you said, there's a lot of other churches. I don't want to say that. There's a lot of other organizations out there. And if an evangelist just was somebody to get the work done, now again, getting the work as far as the true work, I know that's what you're saying. But yet, you take Joel Osteen, got this huge congregation. He's getting, in a lot of people's mind, he's getting the work done. But when you look at that there is things that an elder needs to be, I can understand that a person that, obviously the apostle or Paul he was appointed. God he worked with the Holy Spirit with him. Same thing with Timothy and some of those guys. What I'm trying to figure out is because there's such for elders, there is such a great qualifications, if you want to say that, or their personality. You would almost think there'd be something like that for an evangelist. Just because, the way that I look at elders is they're the ones running the church.
Yeah.
And so they need to have integrity and everything else because they are running God's people, and making sure they're not going astray. Where the same thing with an evangelist or, again, they can mislead people, and we see that now. And again, they're ultimately sending people to hell and taking them with them. So,
Yeah. 2 Timothy chapter 2. Maybe a little bit more on that point. Second Timothy chapter 2, starting in about verse 22. Flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. But refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, knowing that they produce quarrels. These are qualifications for an evangelist. Okay? Now, the Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome. Not just evangelist, but you're going to be effective. Okay? Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wrong, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them repentance leading to the knowledge of the truth. And they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil, having been held captive by him to do his will. Okay? You're not going to get the work done unless you can do all the things that Paul's talking here. Right? Patient when wrong, kind, all those things. See, they feed in there. See, again, it's the difference between substance and blowing smoke. And, you know, you guys have heard me on occasion talk about get the study, keep the study, expand the study. And there's one step more than that, and that's teaching others how to get the study, keep the study, and expand the study. And had several conversations with different people over the years on that, and they say, well, I don't quite understand that. I said, well, Socrates was walking along the water with one of his disciples named Alcibiades. And Alcibiades says, I want to know what you know. See, and that point, it's a matter of historical record, Socrates put his arm around him, and they walked down into the water, and Socrates was a strong guy, put his head under the water. Okay? Alcibiades started fighting, figured out, oh, he's not letting me up. So he's fighting, finally broke loose. And so Alcibiades said to Socrates, he said, what'd you do that for? He said, well, I was answering your question. What do you mean you answered my question? He said, well, when you want to know what I know as badly as you wanted to live just a few minutes ago, then you'll know what I know. See? And that also answers the question about getting the study, keeping the study, and expanding the study, and helping others. See, you're going to know anybody in order to understand even what you're talking about, going to have to go through the process. And so that's why who is more important than what, why is more important than how, because the who and the why will propel you into getting the job done.